Hey, it's DeagleBeagle. Today we're going to go over whether you should use Psyshock or Psychic and why. So for the title I put VGC 23 Series 2 top tier list. So base and common defenses and high special defense Mons underrated. Okay, so I define top tier again as Mons that are consistently good on almost every team without needing much support from allies. So I believe it would be equivalent to either S or A tier if you're using the normal tier system. Anyways, I'm mostly just talking about the Mons that are worth using. That's really what this list is. And there's more that's worth using than this list, but there's not a lot more unless they're a really good powerhouse in Trick Room, or they're really good if weather is set up or something like maybe Dreadnought or Mudsdale in Trick Room. But typically these are the Mons that we're going to focus on, even though some of them are really underrated. Now, I'm showing this first because you may not want to look through all the details of all the base stats and whatnot. I already did all that for you. So the top Mons for Psyshock are Fluttermane, Gallade, Gyarados, Iron Hands, Iron Moth, Mimikyu, Sylveon, Tatsugiri, and Volcarona. Probably the most important ones are the most used ones, so you're going to have Fluttermane and Iron Hands be used a lot, and a few of these other ones will be used a lot as well. Gyarados is not going to be used a lot, neither is Gallade most likely, so you're mostly looking at the Paradox Pokemon and a few others. In general, I would say Psyshock is worse than Psychic. Outside of certain matchups, but in some ways it is actually better. So we'll get through that. So yeah, I can't say that you should always use Psychic because that's just not true. Because we'll get to the reasons why later. I'm going to show the top Mons for Psychic. And when I mean the biggest difference, I mean the biggest difference in special defense and defense. So, Psychic's better in general versus just the vast majority of Mons because they either have the same defenses or they actually have like more defense than special defense. So in that case, Psychic's better. Like Great Tusk, for example, that has way more defense than special defense, even with Assault. For this list, by the way, I'm even keeping in mind Assault Vest. And even with the Assault Vest, there's no way that Great Tusk can have higher... Well, it might have barely higher special defense, actually, if you max it out with Assault Vest. But in general, it would be... Psychic has more power, though. So even in that case, you would do more damage with a Psychic. Amoonguss, it depends on their EVs. So if they make it really specially bulky, it... I mean, for all these, it depends on their EVs. But for Amoonguss, it could be EV'd any way they want to EV it. So you don't know if it's going to be high special or high defense. I think in Series 1, much more commonly, it had high defense. But I think we would see more special defense on Amoongus's in this day and age with Series 2 because the metagame is a lot more special. But in Amoongus's case, I suppose some people might still be using the high defense one because they're used to Series 1. So it depends, but I would say in general Psychic is better because even if they have about the same special defense as defense, it just has 10 more power, so that's more. And Iron Bundle has really low special defense but pretty high defense, even though its HP is not too great. Even though the HP is totally irrelevant for Psyshock versus Psychic. And Pelipper, it has 100 base defense and 70 base special, and it typically doesn't run any special defense EVs because or defense because it typically doesn't have room for that. It might max its HP. In fact, I used to give it defense a little bit for mouse hold, but now that that's not used that much, I don't imagine anyone's going to really run defense. If anything, they would run special defense because it's weaker in that respect. But even if they give it some special defense, Psychic will still be better. And then Tauros Fire, unless they use Assault Vest with Tauros, it's going to do more damage. Or even if they use Assault Vest, about the same damage. So Psychic's just better. Torkoal has low special defense. Psychic is just better versus that. So it depends on what you want to counter. I'd say Psyshock versus Psychic. Believe it or not, I wouldn't look so much at these Pokemon to figure out whether you should use it or not. I would mostly think about, is it better in general? Because these are only like a very small fraction of the metagame. So is something better in general? If it's better just versus 90% of Pokemon, then you might want to use it. Well, with that said, certain Pokemon are used more versus compared to other Pokemon like Iron Bundle and Fluttermane and Amoonguss are going to be very common, but certain ones like Gyarados will not. So you got to keep that in mind. And Psychic, we'll get to the advantages later of whether you should use Psychic or... Actually, we should do it right now because I'm already kind of talking about it. So I'm going to move these up. Okay. We haven't even looked at the defenses and special defense yet. Okay, we're going to look at this slide first. Pros and cons of Psyshock over Psychic. So, Assault Vest Pokemon, for Psyshock, Assault Vest Pokemon tend to take more from Psyshock. And Psyshock can get around Imprison more likely than Psychic, because Psychic's more common. Especially if they're trying to imprison you, they're more likely to use Psychic, even knowing the certain advantages of Psyshock. Psyshock might be good to get more reliable damage versus high special defense but lower defense Mons. So it would be really good for coverage. So basically offensive, coverage, and versatility. So there's certain Pokemon, like I was saying, there's only a couple Pokemon that have significantly less defense than special defense. But the thing with those Pokemon they are very common. Like Iron Hands is very common with Assault Vest. Almost all of them run Assault Vest. Some run Citrus or whatever, but that's very common. Fluttermane is very common. But then on the other hand, Iron Bundle is very common, so Psyshock would be bad against that. Psyshock would be worse against Great Tusk. But in some cases, it may not matter that much because it may do enough damage anyways where it's not going to make a difference. So you got to think about it for your team, not just looking at certain things and focusing solely on one aspect. You got to take the whole thing, you got to take it as a whole with your team. And okay, cons of Psyshock. Psyshock does less in general to things that are not Assault Vest, as they tend to have more defense naturally or invest in it to the point where it evens out with special defense, or they have more defense than special defense. Psyshock having less power means even if they have the same special defense and defense stat, it does less. So it's not like it's 90 and 90. No, they made it 80 for a reason, because they know you can use it as a move to just get coverage versus Pokemon that have a weakness, in the sense that Sylveon is weaker defensively than special defensively. Okay. There's certain Pokemon that are not top tier yet. I feel like the metagame's going to shift a little bit to more special defensive Mons and Assault Vest. The Pokemon that have high special defense, typically almost all of them are already high tier, the ones that have high HP and or special defense. So there's not going to be a much of a change in Mons being good all of a sudden. No, it's going to be more like somebody's going to slap an assault vest on something because they realize how many special moves are being used now in Series 2. I should even write that down. Um, we're going to make a new slide. Okay. Series 1 to 2 trend in physical versus special attacks. So I'm going to say more, what do you call it? More special attacks in Series 2 than in Series 1. And that's basically the bottom line. And, okay, and therefore people will gravitate towards AV and Mons with more special defense. So that means Psyshock will get better over time if this trend continues. So let's look at some of the good special attackers. Actually, I'll probably do that next video. I'll just list some great special attackers. In some, I should say, common special attackers include Fluttermane, Iron Bundle, etc. Those are the most common, probably the most common paradoxes. And we were on this list. So if you look at the list of Mons that have high special defense and moderate HP, Oranguru is one of them. Okay, but these Pokemon have high special defense, and I should say the same word, moderate or decent. Cetitan, Drifblim, Dondozo, Slaking, Hariyama, Clodsire, Vaporeon, Dudunsparce, Gogoat, Screamtail, and Brewbonnet, but most of these Pokemon are not top tier. Well, actually, all of them are not top tier. I don't think these Pokemon will really shift in how good they are unless we find a way for them to be used that we haven't seen before. But I don't think that will happen because I've looked extensively at all their moves and they have too many unredeeming qualities of it. So these Pokemon probably aren't worth even thinking about. But there will be a lot more Assault Vest users, like I was saying. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Now let's get to the base stats. So Amoonguss, 70 defense, 80 special defense. Psyshock is not as good as Psychic, and you can actually just read all of this for yourself. So you can pause the video and just read all of this, but typically you'll see a trend of Psyshock being worse than Psychic for almost all the Pokemon. So like literally all the Pokemon except the ones where Psyshock is better. So pretty much every Pokemon except these, with very minor maybe advantages for Psyshock for the other Pokemon I haven't listed in here. So it's not to say these are the only times when Psyshock will do more, but it's The only times when it will do significantly more. And by significant, I mean more than just like 5-10%, more like 20% or more. Okay. And you can keep reading all that. And then the next one. So yeah, some Pokemon it doesn't really matter because you're gonna one-shot Gengar probably anyways from even a weak Psyshock or Psychic. And then some Pokemon are dark, so these moves don't even like affect it unless it Terra stalls to change its defensive typing. And you can pause this slide to read up on all the differences, but you'll see the same trend as the last slide, where most Pokemon have about the same defensive special defense. In fact, a lot of them had the same exact stat even. So in that case, Psychic's better than Psyshock because of the higher base power, and there's rare cases where Psyshock's better by far than Psychic. Usually the trend is that Psychic is better, about the same, but usually the trend is that Psychic is slightly better than Psyshock. That's the most common trend among like 80-90% of the Pokemon, is that Psychic is slightly better because it has 10 more power. And a lot of Pokemon have about the same defenses or even higher defense. There are some exceptions to that. I guess it's not that much more common though for a Pokemon to have way higher defense than special defense, because there are a decent amount of Pokemon like Sylveon that have high special defense but low defense. But typically Psychic is just better. But maybe in this current metagame it may not be if you're really trying to hit Iron Hands and stuff. I think it matters more for the Pokemon that are weak to it. So let's look at who's weak to Psychic. Well, or takes a lot from Psyshock. I mean, Iron Hands is weak to a Psychic move. So is Iron Moth. So it's going to be a big difference there, especially with Iron Moth having such low defense compared to special defense and not typically EVing it very much. And then Psychic, the biggest difference will probably be, depends on the item on Great Tusk. If it doesn't have Assault Vest, it would be Great Tusk, but if it has like Assault Vest, then the next biggest difference would probably be like Iron Bundle or Torkoal. Okay, anyways, where were we? A lot of Pokemon resist both too, so even if you do a little bit more with Psychic or a little bit more with Psyshock, it's pretty much negligible. And same trend as before. Same trend as before. You can pause this one too. You can go back and pause this one before you do that. And then this one, you can pause that. Now, Tyranitar's has one exception. Oh, I meant to say ice types. Ice types, if hail is up, sorry, snow. If snow is up, you have more defense. But we're gonna assume that snow is not usually up, unless it's on the Pokemon called Abomasnow, because it calls in its own snow. And Tar, though, it has more special defense, usually because sand's up. But even in that case, it's immune, so it doesn't matter. So thanks for watching. I think the next video is going to be like on the difference between Foul Play and Snarl, or some weak dark move, so you can see if you should use Snarl or Foul Play. I came up with this other list for Murkrow, so I'll show that on the next video. Thanks for watching. Please share this video.